But I agree with you that he is wrong to think that the government needs to step in and do something about this because they have completely screwed up Social Security, right? They
Yes.
have not, they have mismanaged that so much to the fact that they Bernie Sanders and crew have sparked fear and anxiety into Americans because nearly every American that is approaching Social Security is somewhat worried about it.
Welcome to Upticks with Jake Falcon, founder and CEO of Falcon Wealth Advisors. In this podcast, we help high net worth individuals overcome financial complexities. We do this by enhancing financial literacy and discussing topics in a language free from industry jargon. Join us as we help explain exactly what having a solid financial plan means as Jake draws from years of experience in helping hundreds of individuals get financially organized and focused on their goals. We hope you find Upticks educational, entertaining, and shareable. Now, on to the show.
Welcome back to Upticks with Jake and Cory. Cory, welcome back to the show.
Jake, thanks for having me.
We have some fun personal highlights to share. First, I want to start with you. The baby shower pictures on social media looked awesome. Looks like
Yes.
Cassie had a great turnout. And Rachel gave me a little bit of crap about this, Cory. I get it now. It was cool of you probably to show up at the end as the husband, the father of the child. So you got anything? It looked great from the pictures.
Let me first say, Rachel, thank you for sharing that feedback with Jake. But no, in all seriousness, the shower was great. It was everything I could have hoped it would be, really, for Cassie and for the baby. Everybody that was there had a great time. The Carriage Club did a great job as always. And everyone was very generous with their gift giving. But we really just appreciated the chance to celebrate with everyone. And it's a lot of fun to see Cassie that excited, to see our families that excited. And it's just making everything more real as June approaches, which is exciting too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm really happy for you guys, and that's cool. And I'm glad you guys had a good event.
Thank
New
you.
York City proved to also not disappoint. It was, it was a little cold, and it actually rained one day really badly, like it rained all day. However, we had a great time. We went to March Madness in Brooklyn. We went to the Brooklyn Nets arena. It was really nice, newer arena, I think, Cory. Saw a game and a half, and we went to a Broadway show, with Daniel Radcliffe. Do you know who that is?
I do. He played Harry Potter, right?
Yeah, he did a great job. And I got to see a magic show. This guy somehow popped up on my Instagram or Facebook Reels. Yeah, he was really good, though. He was really good, really entertaining. So, yeah, Rachel and I had a great time. We love New York, had some great food, and got to walk around, got our steps in. So it was good. It's good to be back in Kansas City, but it was good to get away for a few days in a different city also.
Good. What was the game like? Was it pretty exciting? I mean, was just the energy in the arena? I'm just curious with it being March Madness.
It's interesting. I don't know, Cory, and I probably have, but I don't know how many games I've been to where I didn't have a strong team that I was rooting for. So what happened is I bought these tickets as a Christmas gift for Rachel, sight unseen. So we had no idea until Selection Sunday of who we were going to be watching. So neither of us had a strong affinity to either school. However, randomly, we wound up sitting next to Northwestern section. And I was rooting for the FAU Owls, actually, because they're in my alma mater's conference, UTSA. So, but I'll tell you, it was cool to be next to the Northwestern section because I think we were sitting next to either somebody's brother or son was playing in the game. I think one of the old coaches. Cool. So it was cool to see how engaged these people were. And I wasn't, you know what I mean? Like as a bystander almost.
I do.
So that was actually cool. Now, would I do that again? I don't know, actually. I don't know if I would just buy tickets to a random game. I think next time I either might pick a different city so that Rachel and I can, like, let's say it's in New Orleans. I've been to New Orleans. I don't think Rachel has. Maybe we go to New Orleans, eat some good food, and go watch some basketball there, for example. But I think it might have been more fun for the Final Four, right?
Sure.
Or something like that. Or a team or school that both of us wanted to root for. So anyways, it was cool, though. I don't regret doing it. I just don't know if I would do it like that exactly again. I might switch it up a little
bit. That makes sense. But like you said, it was a long weekend in New York in addition to seeing a few basketball games.
Right, exactly. So that's not the only reason we went. It's not like we were in, Timbuktu and only there to watch
Right. Yeah. Yes.
basketball. There's a lot
Yes.
going on in New York, so it was just part of our trip, not the whole
Good.
trip. So
I'm glad you guys had fun.
good. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. It was a great time. And you this week included something from a listener or reader or somebody that, brought something up. They didn't necessarily want it on the show, but I would love to talk about it. So the chart, or I guess the graphic, talks
Yeah.
about insurance losses in 2023. Cory, what do you have for us?
So last year in 2023, there were almost $93 billion in weather-related losses in the insurance industry, Jake. And since 2008, there hasn't been a single year with less than $10 billion in losses from storms. But what was interesting about this, and the reason I wanted to include it and talk about it here today, and I know if you're watching the show, you can see the map as we put it up on the screen, but if you're at home listening, really what this displays is all around the country, map of the United States and where these big storms have occurred. What I thought was real interesting about this is how hyper-focused many of them are in the Midwest, because I frankly feel the narrative around insurance and storms is a bit different, at least from conversations with people, that they feel as if there's a lot more harsh weather conditions on the coasts. That's driving up insurance prices, and that's why you and I and everyone else are paying more for our insurance. But this is just simply highlighting that it is all around the country, a lot of it very much focused in the Midwest, and premiums are rising, obviously, as losses mount. But I really think like the takeaway for anybody who's watching this or listening to this is that you just don't want to sleep on shopping your property and casualty insurance. We've talked about that some on the show. One of the articles that I'm going to highlight here today too, Jake, actually talked about someone specifically that found almost $3,000 in savings in their annual budget from shopping around insurance. That's why I wanted to talk about it today. What do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, Tornado Alley has always been a thing. You're right, though. As of late, I feel like it's hurricane, 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 and they want to poke blame at all of the insurance premiums in Florida and whatnot. So I think this, I appreciate the person that shared this with you. I think it is interesting, and you have to understand that weather happens all over the country. But the good takeaway is you're right. You need to shop those insurance premiums. You want to be with a carrier that's obviously going to be able to pay out if you have a claim.
Of course.
You also don't want to be overpaying if XYZ insurance can give you the same amount or better coverage for the same price or cheaper than ABC insurance. So you just want to look at that. That's not something you want to sleep on. We'd recommend reviewing that certainly anytime you have a major purchase or change, or at least every few years. You don't want to be changing every year, because actually I think that might ding you a little bit in the insurance world. However, that is something you definitely want to pay attention to and review. Just like you review your financial plan and investments, you should review your insurance.
Yeah,
Good.
do that with an independent insurance broker that can shop multiple insurance companies and carriers.
Yes. I mean, I think it's got to be very difficult for some of these insurance agents, Cory, that only represent one brand. I mean, if you're only selling one widget and that's all you've got, it's really hard to compete nowadays with these independent agents who can shop 10 brands or 20 brands or whatever it is. So again, I would go with an independent agent so they can shop multiple carriers and help find the best solution for you with a reputable company that'll be able to pay out a claim that hopefully won't overcharge you. Good one.
Excellent.
Good one. Thank you for sharing this. Before we go into headlines, Cory, a quick commercial for Upticks. I'm humbled. Our subscriber count continues to grow on YouTube. We are on Apple, iTunes, and Spotify as well. So if you're watching, listening to Upticks, thank you so much. Please like and share our content. We are recording Upticks to enhance financial literacy at scale. And so the only way to do that is for our listeners to share our content. So thank you so much for tuning in. Also, if you're watching or listening to this and you're not on our weekly email newsletter, I would encourage you to email Luke at falconwealthadvisors.com, and he can make sure to add you to his weekly newsletter that he sends out on our behalf. That's actually packed with a lot more information than just Upticks, Cory. We have several groups at Falcon Wealth Advisors that will also chime in. I will call them mini blogs. So financial planning will write a mini blog, our investment group will write a mini blog, our operations. So again, you get a lot more information in the email than just what you and I cover on today's show.
Very good.
All right, good. With that, Cory.
Play ball.
All right. I think kick us off here, Cory. What do you got?
All right, Jake, the era of no-brainer 5% returns on cash is ending.
Right. So it's been pretty easy here the last year or so, Cory, to get 5%. And we've talked about it a lot on this show, is that you need to double check with your savings, checking account and make sure that you're getting more than 0% on your cash. But what this is talking about, though, is more on the fixed income or bond side. And the takeaway from this article, Cory, is that you don't want to necessarily go chasing yield right now. Short-term cash is fine, but on the investments, I want to see you continue to ladder out your maturities. Now, again, full disclosure, this is not investment advice, Cory, but what we're getting at is if you can buy a bond paying 5% and potentially lock that in for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, that might be something you should consider as it relates to your financial plan and what your goals are. So I don't want people cashing in their bond portfolio, for example, and putting it all in a high yield savings account, because if and when rates do decide to lower or drop, you don't want to be caught with lower yielding savings accounts when you could have locked in some yield now. And there's an old saying that we were told a long time ago, Cory, when you buy the ladder, rates don't matter. And so the whole point is you want to buy bonds or CDs or whatever with maturity dates that literally, like rungs on a ladder, Cory, go up 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 4 year, 5 years. And you want to lock in some of these attractive yields so that if and when, and we don't know when, we don't know if rates do drop, you're not susceptible to as much interest rate risk. Do you have anything to add here, Cory?
That's good. I think you've covered that pretty well, Jake. I don't think there's much that I have to add.
Good. Yeah. So again, the key here, though, set a meeting with your financial planner, or certainly Cory or myself, and we're happy to take a look at your fixed income portfolio and make sure that everything's structured that's best aligned with you and your financial plan. All right, Cory, good. Let's go to the next topic here. Cory, how I'm talking to clients about the 60-40 portfolio now.
Yes, this article was written, Jake, actually by another advisor. And this was written on Investopedia, but I wanted to share a few of the takeaways from this because there's been a lot of articles that highlight the 60-40 portfolio, that being a benchmark, how it's performed, et cetera. What I took away from this, though, and what I wanted to share here today was that when you think about portfolio construction and your financial plan, doing that in a sound, prudent way is not about chasing the latest market trends. It's ultimately about following strategies that are proven successful over the long term. And I don't know if you knew this, Jake, but the average intra-year dip, so this is just throughout the year, for a 60-40 portfolio with 60% of someone's money invested in the S&P 500 is what he's talking about in this article, and 40% in a bond index. The average intra-year dip has been 7.7% to the downside, despite fluctuations, but positive returns in 37 out of 44 years since 1980. And I really think that the principles underpin a balanced long-term investment approach and how those really still endure despite all of the trends, despite all of the shiny objects that are out there in the market. And the reality is that I don't think that people should just forsake the wisdom of diversification and strategic asset allocation because of what's happening in the market in the short term.
Right. And let's be clear here. We're not necessarily recommending every client be 60-40, 60% in stocks, 40% in bonds. What we're saying, though, is that a lot of times this portfolio will get a black eye in the media saying it no longer works or you need to do something different. I think that was your point here in the beginning, that regardless if your allocation is 50-50, 70-30, 60-40, 40-60, whatever, it's the key is, like you said, don't go chasing these fads. You don't need to go fidget with your portfolio every time CNBC or Fox Business reports something, right? Or whatever. Right. You don't need to go change it every time we have an election. You don't need to go change it every time we have a war, right? You don't need to go fiddle with your portfolio. That history, and again, that's no predictor of the future, but historically speaking, the market has rewarded the patient, disciplined investor. And the real takeaway, Cory, is that you don't want to have any money you need to access in the short term in stocks to begin with.
Correct.
So what the stock market does day over day, week over week, month over month, should not be relevant to a well thought out financial plan. And so I love it. I'm glad this person wrote this article and they just zoomed out a little bit, Cory, is what it sounds like. It's like, look, if you were in a moderately aggressive portfolio or moderate, whatever you want to call it, and you just stuck with it, you actually did pretty well since the 80s, which is great. And I love it. I'm glad you included that. So, and we can't talk about that enough, frankly, because I think people lose sight of that because the media gets so crazy with their reporting.
Exactly. In the 14 years, Jake, now that we've worked together, I'm not kidding. I'm confident that every year in those 14 years, there's probably been at least one article about how the 60-40 portfolio is dead, right? And how it doesn't work anymore. But that's every year for 14 years. And I'm not saying that it's the end all be all for everyone, but the bigger point here is exactly what you've described. We got to zoom out and look at the big picture.
Right. That's good. That's good. Look good. Let's go to the next one.
All right, Jake, boring versus exciting, compound interest.
Yeah, so this was by our friend Carl Richards, who I think you and I have quoted on here before. He's talking about saving your money and letting it do its thing. So hear about this one, Cory. I don't know if you read this, but I want to ask you. If you take a penny and double it every day for 30 days, do you know how much you would wind up with? Now, if you've already seen it, don't feel like you need a guess. Have you seen this?
A couple $1 million?
That's $5.4 million.
Okay. All right. Well,
so that's what you're close. That's what compounding does, though.
Yes.
But this is what's fascinating, Cory. On day 7, you're only up to $1.27. And in fact, by day 15, so halfway there, you're still only at $614. So the key here is, yeah, right. So it all happens at the end. So the fact is, the reason most of us don't ever get to see this powerful force at work is because we're not willing to go through the boring part. This is what Carl says. I'm quoting him from this article. Boring is good. Stop chasing fads and the quick buck. Do a little bit every day to get better, earn more, save more, etc., and let compounding do its thing. I've talked about this before. Warren Buffett made most all of his money after he was in his 60s, right? So he invested for probably, 30, 40 years, and he still made a lot of money, don't get me wrong, but this huge amount of wealth that he has amassed happened after his 60s, when most people are retiring. So
really good.
I talk about this too. This is a little separate subject with young people, though. I think in bouncing careers, I think there's a lot to be said by just putting your head down and working hard, getting promotions, growing your salary, getting raises, and grinding it out. Now, if you're in a toxic work environment or you have a glass ceiling or things aren't panning out for you, by all means, it's okay to jump ship. But I think a lot of people, Cory, they see things on Instagram or social media or the news, and they want it now, right? Well, my friend is making X amount of dollars, or my friend's a millionaire. I want to be a millionaire today. And so that's when they start go and chase these fads, and they try to get rich quickly or rich overnight, and it doesn't work. Just save your money, invest it wisely, let it compound, and you can be in really, really good shape. Right?
Yeah, stick through the boring part, right? Stick through the boring part. And I think that's your point about jobs, about investing, whatever it might be. Exactly what you've described here, Jake. If someone decided that as their penny was doubling and they had $600 15 days in, they decided that strategy wasn't working for them, or they decided it was time to move on for something else, they've completely missed the latter half like you've described. So I think that's the boring part in a lot of ways is the exciting part when you know what's on the other side of it. And the key there is to just keep going.
Right. Isn't that crazy though? $600 halfway through. If you just wait another 15 days, in this example, you'd have $5 million. So again, don't get caught up on it. It works. Compounding works. It's a wonderful thing. Money will grow on top of itself and double over. You just got to give it time. You got to give it time. You got to have patience, which is hard for me, Cory. I'm not a real patient guy. You got to have patience. You got to have discipline, and you got to have a financial plan. And if you can do those things, then there's really a lot of doors that can open up for you. You can potentially hit your financial goals, retire when you want to, leave the amount of money to your kids and grandkids that you want to do. But you got to have patience, you got to have discipline, and you got to have a well thought out financial plan. And that's the key here. And the beauty is, Cory, compounding works on its own, right? You don't need some magic wand. You got to just let it do its thing. Let it work.
Yeah, that's really good. And it's simple, Jake. It's just not easy.
Right. Exactly. So I appreciate Carl for sharing that in here. All right, good, Cory. Next one here, Bernie Sanders and Fidelity. 2 views on America's retirement readiness.
This was from Barron's, Jake. And what I thought was interesting about this is there was a few things that were highlighted. One, The most recent retirement readiness report, which is something that Fidelity publishes every year, came out recently. It highlighted bright spots about retirement savings and account balances. It really just pointed to a lot of things that are actually moving in the right direction. But on the other hand, there is almost simultaneously in the political arena, Bernie Sanders has made the argument that the demise of pension plans has created more unstable retirements for everyday Americans and is calling for federal legislation, which of course he is, to fix it. My question to you, Jake, is the big part of his argument for why this needs to change is because of what retirement looked like for someone literally 50 years ago. And my question is, how useful is it for us to look at the way that things were 50 years ago to determine what's working today or what should work today? And I also think that Social Security, which we talk a lot about on the show, is the biggest pension plan in this country, and it has major solvency issues. So it doesn't quite compute for me here why there would be calls for legislation to do away with 401ks, to introduce pension plans, and for all of it to be centralized to the government. What do you think?
Yeah, that's scary. You're right. I mean, I get what he's saying, because Cory, we have quite a bit of clients that have pensions or had pensions.
Of course.
And they are usually in not always, but oftentimes they're in usually pretty good shape. But I agree with you that he is wrong to think that the government needs to step in and do something about this, because they have completely screwed up Social Security, right?
Yes.
They have mismanaged that. So much to the fact that they, Bernie Sanders and crew, have sparked fear and anxiety into Americans, because nearly every American that is approaching Social Security is somewhat worried about it. So why in the world, and it's all about power with Washington. And I'm not picking on Bernie Sanders. All these politicians, Cory, it's all about power. And
Correct.
So by doing that, you would be giving the government more power. And I just don't have confidence in them because, like you said, they've screwed up Social Security. And so I think, though, to his point, it would be interesting for certain industries and sectors and companies to roll out pensions again, right? I wonder what that would do to attract a certain type of workforce. So let's say you need a workforce, a blue collar workforce, because that's what's typical of these pensions many times, not always. But maybe you need a blue collar workforce and you're having a hard time attracting them. Maybe then you roll out a pension if you're a company and say, hey, you know what? We need you. We're going to have a modest 401k, but we're also going to have this really cool pension that if you retire from this company, we're going to pay you X amount for the rest of your life or give you a lump sum or whatever, right? So I think it should be up to the corporations to figure that out if they're having problems attracting those types of workers. Like even at Falcon Wealth Advisors, Cory, if we were we're very fortunate, we don't have a problem attracting talented people here, but that could be a perk that we would roll out, right? And so I see where he's saying that the common American worker's retirement might not be as well off as 50 years ago. But to your point also, who cares about 50 years ago? We need to worry about today.
Yes.
And what's going on today. And again, I don't think it's an issue for the government to solve. I think this is what corporations need to solve.
Exactly.
A good one.
Yes.
You have anything else? That's a good one. Good topic.
No, thank you. You've covered a lot of it. I just found it fascinating that just pointing to the way that something was 50 years ago is really like the primary thesis for why something should be done the way that it is today. But it's like, look, the world changes, and that's okay. Change is not necessarily a bad thing. The world does change, but let's acknowledge that, and then let's talk about the right way to address things today versus maybe what worked 50 years ago when there was half as many people on our planet, for what it's worth.
Right. Well, in 50 years, like the workforce looks different. I mean, there were so many more manual labor jobs 50 years ago, where now a lot of that stuff has been automated or computers are doing it, right? And I'm not saying that. So now those workers are just working in a different way. And so it's silly to do things the same way they were 50 years ago. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I find it entertaining when it's like the solution to the problem is a bigger centralized government. Like, I don't think so. I don't think so. Look at healthcare. Nope. Look at Social Security. Look at all of those things.
Right. And let's be fair. If our government was good at solving those problems,
yes,
and had great and had systems that worked, I'm not saying that I think that'd be a great idea, but they have to prove it first. Like before he says something like that, he should say, let's fix Social Security first.
Right.
And then we can figure out, but anyways, they don't do that. They don't.
They don't.
All right, let's go to the next one.
Jake, these retirees have a good problem. They aren't spending enough.
Yeah. So it's a flip side, Cory, in this article. Now, again, first and foremost, though, it's nearly, not all of our clients, but nearly all of our clients, Cory, that I would meet with at least, their number one fear is they don't want to run out of money, right? So we got to make sure that box is checked first and foremost for everybody. But oftentimes, and you probably see this also, that we have to tell clients, look, you're going to have a major required minimum distribution problem in your 70s, or you're going to leave $20 million to your heirs. Is that something you want to do? And they'll say, no, I don't want to do that. But then they still won't spend. And so what this article talked about, Cory, is that there's a fascinating psychological event happening, and that what I've seen, spenders are spenders and savers are savers. So the tough part is, if you have a history of overspending, maybe you always had a little bit of credit card debt, maybe you always lived a little bit paycheck to paycheck. Well, you know what? More than likely in retirement, your financial plan is always going to be a little tight. And if on the opposite of that, if you were always maxing out your 401k, paid off all your cars, never had a credit card, more than likely, what I've seen, Cory, your financial plan is going to have quite a bit of a surplus. So my question to you is, Cory, what do you tell someone who isn't spending enough?
I ask them when they started working and saving 30 or 40 years ago, why they did that and what their intent was, because I find exactly what you're talking about to be true, Jake. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but it can be a struggle for people to flip that switch. For me and you, Jake, to tell someone you can retire, you don't need to work anymore, you don't need to save anymore, and now it's time for you to start spending money. That's telling someone to do something totally different than what they've done most of their adult life in their career. And that is not as easy as a lot of people might think.
Right. According to the article, they said that they are doing it to self-insure against the unknown. Right. So maybe they had parents that had gone on hard financial times, or maybe they're history buffs and they worry about the, financial crisis or the stock market crash, so they're trying to protect themselves and their family. You're right. So it's a tough one. And again, just like we have to coach people to spend less, sometimes we have to coach people to spend more. And it's not, but again, in the end, Cory, we just want our clients to live satisfying lives and go out and get to enjoy what they want to do. And if I can coach someone on saying, hey, go and buy that second home, or go and pay for your grandkids' college, right? And instead they're going to have 14 million in their 90s instead of 15 million, but they're getting to do these things that are giving them satisfaction and enjoyment now, then that's what I want to do. And that's what I want to help them do. But of course, we don't want them to ever run out of money, right? So we got to balance that for people. It's interesting though, but there is some psychology involved in this, and you got to look at that, and you got to look at both sides of the coin there for our clients.
I'm curious, Jake, as far as this article goes, did they talk at all though, just from a psychological perspective, for these people that aren't spending enough money, do they feel satisfied in their retirement?
Yes, I think many of them do, right? I don't necessarily think they're unsatisfied. I think they're happy, and that there's a certain air of confidence they have knowing that they can weather any storm, right? So I wouldn't say they're unhappy necessarily. Maybe some of them are, but
sure.
The key is you don't want to underspend just to underspend. If you're still fulfilling and checking all those boxes, then that's fine. But if you're saying, you know what, Cory, I would really love to go to Europe, I just don't think I can afford it, but you've got $5 million, maybe you should go to Europe. And that's where the psychology needs to be unwound a little bit, and we need to understand what's going on here.
Yep, that's good.
So, good. All right, Cory, we got time for one more. They chose to take a pay cut, and they say they're happier.
Yeah, so this is maybe the flip side of a lot of what we've talked about here today. This was in the Wall Street Journal, Jake. 15% of workers who switched jobs between late 2020 and 2022, which we've highlighted, a lot of people changed jobs in that time period. 15% of them said that their pay and their benefits decreased, according to data from the Federal Reserve. But 40% of those people say that their new job was better than their last one. And it was highlighted in here, according to a survey, so let's take that for what it is, that roughly half of Americans say that they would be willing to take a 20% pay cut if it let them better prioritize their quality of life. The takeaway from this article, in my opinion, there's a lot of things in here that were interesting, but the way to think about this is to add up the cost of the lifestyle that you want to be able to afford, and then you can back into how much money you need to make in order to be able to afford it. Some people might find that they don't need as much money as they thought, but I really found it fascinating that most of the people interviewed in this article, one, didn't have children. Two, many of them had high earning spouses. And ultimately, I think if somebody's considering a change like this, it's important to understand the impact on your financial plan. And I also think that the perception of stress, because most of the people interviewed in here, Jake, they had, some sort of high stakes job, high pressure, high stress in some, in some form or fashion. But I think the perception of that in the first place is probably part of the issue, that people felt like their quality of life wasn't what they wanted it to be because of their perception of the stress involved in their job. And instead of saying, I can handle this or I can work through it, they say, I'm going to make a change. And I'm sure that some people need to and should do that. But I just wanted to point that out and see what you thought.
Yeah, there's a lot there that you just said. And you're right. I mean, I think they call them dinks now, dual income, no kids, or dinky, dual income, no kids yet. Right. And so you're right. I think I admire this, Cory. So, it should be, I love that point you made though. You should figure out what lifestyle do you want to live, and then what income do you need to make that up. I think the problem though is it depends on the age of these people that they survey too, because I think
most of them were in their 30s.
Okay. 30s is probably right, close enough. Like the issue though is these people though, once they start having kids and start needing to get bigger homes or private schools or other things, then they want more money, but they weren't willing to put in the work to get there. And that's my fear, is that this mentality is going to create a bigger issue down the road. Like, and again, I agree, money can't buy happiness and it shouldn't. I also agree though that perceived stress is different than actual stress. And that, you could say something is very stressful and the exact same event to me could be quite enjoyable. And so it's all about our perception and the way you look at things. It's just like, Cory, when we tell clients, you no longer have to work. You should be going to work because you enjoy what you're doing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but oftentimes we see clients then work quite a bit longer because now they're not doing it for the paycheck. They're doing it because they like it, right? They've decided that the money's not the reason they're there. And so do you have that same experience with clients where you tell them you don't have to work? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think what's happening here though is that people in their 30s, 20s and 30s, they think that they have these stressful jobs and that they don't need the money, and that's great. But you have to realize if you're willing to do that, there are going to be some sacrifices. And if you do have kids, that's going to be a whole nother issue that you're going to have to deal with. And so I would just caution people that I agree. I think there's extremes on both sides. I think there's people that can live very frugal lifestyles and be extremely happy. Yep. And then I think there's people that have very expensive lifestyles and need a lot to be happy. Or need a lot, maybe not necessarily to be happy. But the key here is checking in with your financial plan, meeting with your wealth advisor, and determining what lifestyle you want to see for your family. So that's good. Yes. I'm glad you brought that one up. It's a good one. All right, Cory, that's all the time we have. We're a little bit over, but it's a really good episode. So thank you for joining me today. As always, for our listeners, if you have any questions on your financial plan, simply reach out to service@falconwealthadvisors.com. And if you have any content that you'd like Cory and I to discuss or debate live here on Upticks, simply email Luke@falconwealthadvisors.com. Thanks again, Cory, for joining me, and we hope all of you out there have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Upticks. Click the subscribe button to be notified when new episodes become available. Also, be sure to visit our website, falconwealthadvisors.com, and click the Contact Us button if you'd like to meet with Jake and his team.